And thank you ever so much. Very stirring. Of course, you forgot to mention 1879, Rorke's Drift, when the thin red line of Welshmen, against all of the odds, did it again. So, and we're going to do it again, aren't we? Now then, just so you're aware, we have some questions which have been submitted, and I'm going to, I've divvied them out, so they haven't seen them beforehand, but I'm sure they've had these questions time after time before. I'm going to start with Brendan Chilton. I've got one for you. Do you think the majority of Labour members support the EU?
Oh, it is on. Right, good. Well, actually, the problem the Labour Party's had, and Labour voters and the trade union movement, is that for years it actually hasn't had the debate. It's been suppressed. As we've gone round speaking to Labour members and trade unionists, we've actually found that scepticism is alive and well, and in some parts of the country, particularly the north, particularly parts of Wales, amongst the grassroots level, actually there's quite a lot of hostility to the European Union. In terms of the Labour vote, I think it's the most crucial part of this sort of the demographics of this campaign, because with all due respect to my colleagues, most of the Tories are probably going to vote to leave. I've got a feeling most UKIP voters are going to vote to leave. Might be the odd bod that won't. But the key swing vote, if you like, is the Labour vote and the remaining Liberal vote. So in this campaign, I would just suggest what we've really got to do is just bombard those areas of the country. Leaflets, 2 or 3 times a week, knock on the door 2 or 3 times a week, really go for it, because that's the swing vote, and we've got to hit it, and we've got to win a majority of them if we're to leave on June the 23rd.
Yeah. Wonderful, thank you. And what about your leader, Brendan? What about your leader? Well, because I want to get you in trouble here.
Nigel, I'm sitting next to you on a stage. I'm already in trouble.
Well, you're done for anyway. Right. But I mean, the idea that Corbyn is a principled politician, when for 40 years he supported the Tony Benn view, and the Tony Benn view on the whole of the European question was brilliant from start to the end of his life, when he said, we can't vote for the people that make the laws, we can't remove the people that make the laws, and therefore it's undemocratic and I'm against it. And Corbyn supported that for most of that 40-year period until he became the leader of the Labour Party, and now he's basically gone mute. And what do you have to say about your leader?
Well, thank you for that, Nigel. All I would say is that I think Jeremy Corbyn needs to be true to his convictions and come out and say what he truly believes, which is that we should leave the European Union.
Quite right.
And I would encourage all of you to possibly write to him. I mean, I think there are about 500 people in this room tonight. If 500 letters arrive on his doorstep on Thursday morning telling him to do this, I think you may have to listen.
He can't read!
There goes the career.
Very good. Thank you very much, Brendan. Okay, I have one now for Simon Heffer. Given the short time until the referendum, what are the key vote-winning arguments to ensure victory on the 23rd of June?
Well, I'm pretty certain that the one that I spoke about in my speech, and which every other speaker has echoed, is the key argument, which is, do we believe that we can run our own country, and do we think we deserve to run our own country? And that affects everything from the way we run our economy, our taxation system, and of course our borders. And that is what I say to people. When people say to me, why are you so keen to come out? I say, because I'm grown up, and when I vote, I want to vote for people who can make a difference. I don't want to vote for people who turn around and say, actually, we agree with you on this subject or that subject, but our European masters won't let us change our mind and won't let us change the policy. And there are many arguments that can be used. Unlimited immigration from Europe, I think, is a very powerful one. I agree with everything Nigel has said about the cultural risk we are taking, and the risk certainly to women's rights in this country, which I think is wildly understated, and we need to be very alert to it. But in the end, it all comes back to the same thing. It all comes back to sovereignty. It all comes back to this business of whether we can or cannot run ourselves. We are a developed country. We are a country of largely intelligent people. We are perfectly capable of running ourselves. We did rather well until 1973. We were not in a state of ruination before we went into the European Union. And we can do that again. As I said when I spoke earlier, if we do not take this chance of a lifetime on the 23rd of June, if we think that the domination over us of the European Union has reached its limit, I fear we will be wrong. The European Union will seek to integrate us even further. We'll have even less sovereignty and fewer sovereign rights than we have at the moment. And what we need to say to the people of our country, and it's not scaremongering, it's a statement of fact, if you wish to be grown up and run yourselves, you have to vote to leave the European Union.
Absolutely. Thank you, Simon. Okay, one for Nigel. There is a threat of Port Talbot closing, yet its sister plant in the Netherlands is receiving €100 million grant from the EU. I guess it's a statement of fact there. Would you like to comment?
Well, we've got this unlevel playing field in Europe, haven't we, where, nearly all of our coal-fired power stations have closed down, and yet Germany are building coal-fired power stations like Billio. Yeah. A lot of this is because this game of negotiating in Europe, of getting the best for Britain, is not something any British government or the Foreign Office have been any good at for the last 40 years. We took the European plan for expensive energy and we put bells on it and made it even worse. Mm-hmm. So not only is Europe uncompetitive compared to America, compared to India, compared to China, but Britain is now uncompetitive compared to the rest of Europe also. So we've been very, very bad at standing up and defending our vital industries, whether it's fishing, whether it's steel, whether it's financial services, it doesn't matter where you go. Actually, there is a strong argument that ordinary British people have effectively been betrayed by the politicians in this country, most of whom have never had a job in their lives, who don't understand how the real world works, and frankly, haven't got the guts, that's the polite word, haven't got the guts to stand up and fight for British people and fight for British industry. So let's bring it back to Westminster and let's control it ourselves.
Absolutely. Okay, I have one here for our...
Nowhere's more corrupt than FIFA, come on. And while we're at it, should we leave the Eurovision Song Contest also? Yay! Nil point.
Nil point, absolutely. Okay, our local MP, David Davis, one for you. To what extent do you think that staying in the EU, taking into account the growing migrant crisis, will have effect on South Wales?
Sorry, Nathan. Indirectly, it will have an effect, because one of the big issues that I have to deal with is the complaints that people make about house building going on all over the countryside. And of course, if you bring in 1 million or so people over the next few years, which is quite possible, that's going to mean 1 million housing for 1 million people has to be built. And it may not all go straight away in Monmouthshire, but there will be a ripple effect. People will build houses in London, people from London will move out to Reading, and so on and so forth. One of the great ironies is that I always get these emails from the Greens. Haven't mentioned climate change yet, and I promise not to tonight, because I've got some views on that that are a bit unorthodox. But the Greens are great writers of letters and emails, and they'll email me saying, we don't want any more houses built on this wonderful greenfield site. And then the following week, they'll be emailing me saying, we must do more to bring more migrants into the United Kingdom. And I think that there's an obvious paradox here. I don't have any problem with immigration per se. I don't have any problem with anyone of any race or creed, culture or ethnicity or religion or whatever. I just ask for this. It needs to be managed, and anyone who comes here needs to be willing to respect our rules and our culture. And that's all that I think most people of every ethnic background will agree with this, and all we're asking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just amplify just amplify what David's just said. We have to build a new house, a new dwelling in this country every 7 minutes to cope with current levels of immigration. One new house every 7 minutes to cope with current levels of immigration. And frankly, I think on our relatively small, very crowded island, with a health service that can't cope, with a primary school system that is literally creaking at the seams, it's time to say enough is enough and return to sensible, balanced immigration policies, about a tenth of what they are today.
I'll just be very brief. One other thing we also need to do to get a grip on the housing problem in this country is to stop these billionaires from abroad buying up swathes of the property market in London and other parts of the country and build affordable homes for working people, not to be sold off for profit.
Wonderful, thank you. Brendan, I have one for you now. The Remain camps, Project Fear, is clearly spiralling into increasing hysteria. Suggesting a Leave vote would render the UK a dysfunctional nation seemingly overnight. I think the deciding vote will be the currently undecided. This group appears to be the main target of Project Fear. Surely we must also target the yet to decide with reality. And that's from Dave Hoddle.
Okay. I don't know if Dave is here right now. If he is, there he is. I can see, I think this light's so bright, you can't see a thing. But all I would say is, I think, firstly, Project Fear, which is what we're seeing, it just shows how weak their arguments are. If all they can do is throw at us, oh, if we leave, this will happen, if we leave, that will happen, it just shows that actually they don't really believe in it either. Because if they were so confident in their belief in the European Union, they would stand there with pride and say, yes, we want a federal Europe. Yes, we want to end the powers of our parliament. But they won't dare do it because the country would vote by a landslide against it. Now, in terms of the undecideds in this referendum, I actually think where we are now is you've got roughly 30 to 35% of the country that will vote to stay because they do believe in it, and you've got about 30 to 35% that will vote to leave because they're like us, they believe we should leave. And you've got that group in the middle. And like I said earlier on in my first question, the majority of that sort of undecided bloc are what you might call sort of, you know, New Labour people or Liberal people, Greens as well. Those people that believe in the idealism behind the original project for the European Union, namely peace, harmony, you know, harmonisation amongst arrangements between those countries. So if we're going to win this, we really have got, I can't emphasise this enough, we have got to bombard those areas of the country that are dominated either by Labour or Liberal voters and say, actually people, there is a problem with staying in, because as some of the speakers have highlighted, there are issues to do with migration, there's also the pressures on public services that I think you touched on earlier on, and also our NHS, and I think those sorts of arguments will win them, as well as the issues to do with migration control. What you actually need are different messages for different audiences, and I think to win those, some of the things we've discussed this evening will be a great asset.
Thank you. Simon, the Brussels Eurocrats have stated that a Leave result from the EU referendum will be final, and the EU would not allow us back. Does this mean the EU will accept the result as final and not pursue us for another vote more to their liking?
I very strongly doubt that the EU as we know it will exist 2 years after we leave. Because we are the second highest net contributor. And it isn't just a question that they'll need our money to survive, to run their rather corrupt and disgusting operations. It's also going to mean to other countries that they'll see what we've done and they'll say, well, hang on, if they can do it, why can't we? I mean, I spoke to a very distinguished Irishman about 2 weeks ago on this subject, and he said to me, you know, if you leave, we're going to have to leave too. Now, that's a matter for the Irish to decide. But it's going to be very difficult for Ireland to stay in the EU if we go. It's as simple as that. Not least because they'll probably have to close the border between the 6 counties of Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland. Otherwise, they become a backdoor into Britain for us, and they don't want that any more than we do. They don't want to have refugee camps being set up in Ireland of people trying to get to this country from Europe. But it isn't just about them, it's also countries that have had immense economic hardship because of the utterly misguided and disastrous Euro project. The Greeks, the Spanish, even the Italians, saying, if the British can do this, we can do it. And one thing that we don't seem to talk about very much in this country, for reasons I can't quite understand, is how very bad the French economy is. I mean, our nearest neighbours, 22 miles across the Channel, are a basket case. I mean, they have pretty poor leadership, unfortunately, and they've had that for a long time, but they are a basket case. They are a country that is pretending that the global economy doesn't exist. I mean, they run themselves according to an idea of the labour market that's not prevailed in this country since before the Second World War. It's insane. Those countries will want to go. The European Union, when we decide to leave, will engage in breastbeating and introversion, and they will have a civil war. Well, not with arms, I hasten to add, but they will have a political civil war between themselves, and they will not survive it. So, I mean, look, if they want to play the usual European game of coming back in a year's time and saying, actually, we should have been a bit nicer to you, would you like to have another referendum? I think, the phrase go to hell comes to mind most immediately. And I don't imagine for a moment that we will want another referendum or there'll be any desire to have one. But I would repeat, if we go, the whole disastrous project of Europe will start to unravel, and it will serve them right.
Absolutely.
Actually, I mean, in many ways, there's a wonderful opportunity here. Because what the Remain camp are asking us to do, they're asking us to stay part. I mean, can you imagine if it was the other way round? Imagine if the referendum on June the 23rd was, should we join the European Union? And our Prime Minister said, well, listen, guys, I know we've governed ourselves for the last 1,000 years or so, okay, but what a wonderful idea. We joined this club who makes 75% of our laws. We used to have immigration controls, we'll get rid of those. We used to control our fishing waters, we've decided to share that with our neighbours. We're going to regulate to death the 5 million small businesses in Britain, and for the benefit of all of that, we're going to pay a membership fee of £55 million a day. What would the answer be? It'd be a big, big no, wouldn't it? And actually, they're saying stay part of a club whose currency is a total failure, whose migration policy is a complete disaster, whose accounts have not been signed off by the auditors for 19 years in a row, and where, in Greece and in Spain and in France and in Denmark and in every country in Europe, Germany included, there are now parties on the left, centre and right fighting against the very principles of against the will of the European peoples, bringing them all together. Actually, I think the long-term result of Brexit would be actually very pro-European. Yes. Europe is not that flag, it's not that anthem, it's not Jean-Claude Juncker or Rumpy Pumpy or any of them. Europe is a continent of different, vibrant peoples and countries, different languages, different cultures, different cheeses. And what we should say is Brexit will mean a Europe of vive la différence, of independent states in Europe, trading and being friends together, but not being governed by a centralised bureaucracy in Brussels. You know what? We might not just save ourselves, we might just save the whole of Europe too. You never know. You never know.
And not for the first time, might I add. Okay, just to prove that this is all legitimately going on, I've just received a question for Nigel on my watch. What? Okay, so it's from John Rhys Evans. Too high tech, I know. Nigel, can you please explain how controlling our borders will help Britain be in a better position to help genuine asylum seekers who are fleeing for their lives?
Well, this country has always had a tradition of offering refuge to those in genuine trouble. My family, 300 years ago, were French Protestants. and were being burnt at the stake for their beliefs. Something that I think David's leader would like to bring back in modern Britain today. I think even Heffer's family came from a similar background from the Netherlands, wasn't it? Right. Yeah, okay. And we did the same with Jewish people who came from Russia and from Germany and from Austria. And just over 40 years ago, of course, Idi Amin, who'd gone absolutely crackers and said he would kill all of the Asians, and 28,000 of them came, and they've integrated well and been hugely successful. However, the definition of a refugee is somebody who fears direct persecution as a result of their race, their religion, orientation, or beliefs. And what Europe have done is to open the concept of refugee to anybody that comes from a poor country or is displaced by war. And as I've said before, countless times, Europe simply cannot take countless millions of people, particularly given there is now a new poison, a new problem in the world that is called ISIS. Do you know something? All this talk about migration, all this talk about those that are coming from the Middle East and from North Africa, we've completely forgotten one group of people. Christians. Christians in Syria and Iraq and Iran. People who are being massacred because of their beliefs, and yet I was told by Mr. Juncker a few weeks ago that it wasn't about religion. Refugee status is nearly always actually about religion or ethnicity. And I would say this, had this country last year not accepted legally, because of our open door policy, 642,000 fresh people into this country, if we had normal post-war levels of migration, I think we could open our hearts to more people who were genuine refugees coming into this country. And if we don't start to help the Syrian Christians and the Iraqi Christians soon, they will all be dead.
Absolutely.
Cameron won't even talk about it.
Thank you, Nigel. I wholeheartedly agree with that. Now then, the very last question that I have is from John Collier of Newport, who says, Nigel, would you agree with me that after our victory on the 23rd of June...
Oh, I like John. He's a good chap.
2016, if he then is called to the palace and honoured for his outstanding work, when that happens, we will no longer wonder what the Queen said at Windsor in March.
Yeah, well, I was asked the other day, did I think Michael Gove had leaked the contents of the conversation? It was on ITV Breakfast show. And I said, well, Michael Gove's a Privy Councillor, and if he had betrayed a loyalty, a special confidence given to him by the Queen, he would clearly have to be sent to the Tower. And he hasn't gone. I've no idea where the Brexit Queen story came from, although we can be entirely confident as to the views of the Duke of Edinburgh. Of that there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever. And it was said, with respect to the other parties on the panel, it was said of the late Queen Mother that she was UKIP before the party was even invented. I don't know what the Queen's personal views are, but I would say this, that what we created by going through our civil war rather earlier than many of the other European countries, what we created in this country was a most remarkable system of constitutional democracy and governance. A system where the armed services swear an oath not to the government but to the monarch. It's been a sort of triangular system that has stood the test of time, that has protected us, that has stopped us being overtaken by fascism or any of the other trends. We have a parliament that used to be known over the world as the mother of parliaments. We have a legal system that we should be proud of because it's superior to anything the rest of Europe or most of the world has got. There's a lot in this country we should be proud of, and yet our political class have been prepared to give it all away because they want bigger salaries and bigger stages on which they can strut. And they are the same people, the Mandelsons, the Kinnocks, the Ken Clarks, and all the rest of them, that are urging you and lying to you and telling you we must remain. And we need to build the biggest people's army of modern times, revolt against them, cast down their grand political project, and take back control of our lives, our country, our borders, and our future.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our speakers and panelists. Now, just before we finish, there is something that we traditionally do at all of these Go events, and that is we're going to ask the speakers to sign the Newport Declaration. So I'm just going to grab that. Okay, so here it is, just so you can see it.
You should read it to them.
Read it to them.
Read it to them.
Thank you.
Very important.
Yeah. Otherwise, I don't know what they're signing.
The Newport Declaration. We, the undersigned, declare that in the weeks and months ahead, we shall set aside party politics and work together towards our common goal of a free and prosperous United Kingdom outside the European Union, engaged with the wider world and governed by its own laws.
Quite right.
Good. Once they have signed this, you are free to go. But we would just ask that you put your names and addresses on the forms that you have on your chairs, that you go to the back, find out about where you can get leaflets from, how you can participate, how you can help, and how you can be a part of this people's army that will lead to our independence. Thank you.